All right, we are recording, and I wanted to post something in the chat, which is a link to our revised racial justice page, and invite you not to spend too much time on this right now, but you can see how our conversations about our vision have been unfolding. This vision that's here, our vision for being an anti-racist church, is a work in progress still. Our executive council approved it such that we could share it on our website, but we'll be bringing it before the congregation at our next congregational meeting. And we are excited today to be talking about our Public Remembrance Project, which is something that we just started to have some conversations about back in 2019. And at that time, we had thought that maybe we were ready to reach out to some local artists and designers of color. We had prepared a request for proposal to share with them. We had reached out to some a few leaders in Cambridge, some persons of color who were kind of established leaders. And after some conversations with Carlene, and those of you who have heard me preach this at Pentecostal Tabernacle Church know that she said to us that we might want to slow down and do some more listening. And from there, we developed the idea of having focus groups and asking the members of the broader community, including two at First Church, what they thought of our ideas before we had an RFP, before we kind of said, well, this is what we think we should do. We wanted to kind of take a step back and do some more listening. And Carlene has helped us with that process, and she's here to report on what she learned from those focus groups today. So the link is in the chat. Whoops, I had meant that to go to everybody, and I only sent it to Holly Marple. Sorry, Holly. And the one-page document that Carlene shared is in there too. And I don't know if she wants us to look at that, but Carlene, why don't I hand it to you, and you can fill in whatever pieces. We'll let her offer a report, have some Q&A, and talk about some next steps.
Okay, great. Can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, wonderful. I am wondering if you all, forgive me, I don't know. Dan, did you all send around the summary report?
No, we decided we would do that after you had a chance to offer some context. So we will send it around, but we haven't yet.
Oh, okay, great. So I will stop sharing that screen for the moment and share just a brief capture of the focus groups. Whoops.
While you're doing that, we should celebrate. I'm not sure Carlene has been with us, but she is approved for ordination through the ecclesiastical council process. Woohoo! She's ready to go, yes. Cleared for takeoff. Thrilled for you, Carlene.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So it is really wonderful to be at this point. As Dan mentioned, we began this journey at least 18 months or so ago. It may be a little bit longer. No one anticipated a pandemic. But the focus groups took place a total of 7 that we completed. We're initially hoping to do 8. And these groups were segments of the populations that is historically have been harmed and mostly impacted. That was the overall goal. However, we decided to also do some focus groups at First Church. So first three of the 7 focus groups actually took place within the First Church context. 2 were congregants, a mixed group of congregants identified at First Church, and then one of the focus groups were our neighbors from the Friday Cafe. And other groups consisted of Black identified people of color. I'm not so sure. I was in conversation with one of the conveners of the focus group, and there was a person that's identified as mixed Indigenous and Black. I thought twice about putting BIPOC up there because the I really does mean Indigenous. And so because the Indigenous population is a part of the group, is one of the groups that have historically been harmed by First Church, I wanted to be mindful about including that. So it is only that indication why BIPOC is there. But I'm not sure how much you know that we would need to be more intentional about doing work with persons of Indigenous descent. So one group was specifically focused on formerly incarcerated persons. We had a diverse group in terms of background, in terms of class, of male. Some were pastors, some were professional, some were working, some were unemployed, and a couple within that group were also formerly incarcerated. But it was a broad group of Black male identified persons. That was a particular affinity group within our community. Also a diverse group, affinity group based in Cambridge. Members of the Black Yard, which is a learning community, or we rather not be called homeschool, but for all intents and purposes, that's how it would translate. And that consists of mixed race families, all gender identities across class, and family constellation. And the final focus group was across working and professional class persons of Black African descent. So now I want to, before I walk through, well, actually, I think I'll stay here and do a summary. So some of the insights, and we're going to walk through the document briefly to get a little bit more resonance from that. But some of the insights, some of the key insights from the focus group were indications where people noted that to combat ignorance, that there must be political education in order to build a spirit of anti-racism, right? I have to say, people understood and understand that the context of First Church is a congregation and a community of faith. However, people also understand that the manifestations of white supremacy occurred through the church and manifest most, in terms of impact, mostly through political systems, right? And through political processes. And so that was one of the things that I wanted to highlight. So there must be a really deep and clear understanding of politics and how that plays out in terms of the redistribution and distribution of resources, who has access to what, because those are the mechanisms of racism. Another point to highlight was consistent that history must be taught and understood. So, and that is tied to the next point, which is inclusive of education systems, change and integration of curricula that teaches a much more accurate history of the United States and how white supremacism and racism has played out, and also just Black history as well. Or really the statement is that US history is also Black history, or history of the United States. Folks are conditioned to hear only a particular strand or white history and white interpretation of history, and also false histories. The education system is a prominent area, as I said, all levels of education. And also there must be a clear condemnation of whiteness as a structure, a system, a cultural regime of supremacist violence. So this is also tied to the first point around political education. Because what typically happens is, and this was a point of conversation, that there's a very inward focused, individualistic approach to racism and white supremacy, but that it is mainly systems and structures that individuals set in place that does the most harm. So while interpersonal racism and white supremacy is important, the most significant and real work occurs in challenging and clearly condemning oppressive structures and systems of white supremacist violence. First Church has an opportunity to model, in part, meaning that it isn't the sole responsibility of First Church alone, but given the history of First Church, what atonement may look like. So generally speaking, folks were really excited and heartened, I guess is a better word, to hear about the Remembrance Project and the preliminary ideas around repentance, repair, restitution, and or reparations. Folks felt that in general that is a good start, that is a great place to start. And also the naming of other institutions, as we know, that participated. Harvard came up, government institutions came up in terms of health systems and educational institutions. And folks talked about corporate racism and the multiple ways that repair needs to happen. The housing industry also came up as another systemic and structural mechanism that needs to be redeemed, if you will, right? But given First Church's context as a community of faith, as an institution of faith, that it was a great beginning, and it's heartening to look at being a model, if you will, or having a model for atonement. There should be a redistribution of resources that come from white benefactors of white supremacy. That was also a theme, and we have named repair and reparations as something that is aspirational for First Church as a part of the Remembrance Project and beyond. But that looks very different to various people. There wasn't a clear road to redistribution of resources, but it does, there are some specific things that are named, including financial resources, including having access to education, including land access, et cetera. And impacted communities should drive the process alongside First Church. So we have been broadly talking about how to integrate this conversation and this process alongside communities that are impacted. So members of the focus groups do want to participate, do want to begin to build relationship, do want to be engaged in this process and thinking through what a forward motion would look like beyond the focus groups. I'm gonna stop share there before I go on to next steps. And Dan, we only have about an hour, and since folks have access to the larger documents, have you all had a chance to read through it? Yes? No.
Carlene, we did not share access to the report. We decided we'd wait until you'd give it some context now, and then we'd share it with others. So people haven't seen the detailed report. I thought we had agreed that together, but
okay. I thought it was, for some reason, I thought it was going out beforehand. Not a problem. I can share it, and then we can walk through. Forgive me. Okay, share screen.
That may have been my misunderstanding.
No, it could have been mine as well. So no problem. We can be nimble here.
And we could certainly, share it with folks or post it on the website if it feels comfortable.
Okay, so I can just briefly walk through. The first part is just a summary of the overall ideas within the focus groups. And I think the way to think about focus groups is not as a blueprint for moving forward, but as indicators, right, of what we may find if we engage more deeply with communities that we want to begin to build relationships with. I think it's important to say that that the purpose of focus groups is to just get a sense of what communities are thinking, are feeling about a particular issue, but it's a segment of communities. It is a segment of those populations. So it would not be accurate to make these findings generalizable, but it should stir curiosity to go deeper and to develop a broader mix of ways to be in conversation, to get a sense of who are other parts of the communities that may not have been reached, as well as to maybe develop a plan for outreach, right? This in and of itself is a goodwill effort to begin to generate possibilities for relationship building, for finding more information. The focus groups took place in very intimate context, I might add, and folks felt really comfortable sharing. Folks were offered confidentiality, which meant that they would not be identified specifically unless they wanted to be identified specifically, but that their ideas would be communicated. And we have verbatim transcripts for most of the focus groups that we did. So we had a transcriber to write verbatim. Right now, we are trying to, it's yet to be determined how to best utilize that, because what I will present here or have summarized is somewhat of a thick description, but of course, reading verbatim offers a different set of data, or a more expansive set of the data. So that said, the groups expressed uncertainty, right? I want to highlight this, about what to do or where to go with the new comprehensive education that we've all been exposed to, right? So there is a public, there are public efforts to bring to the fore of the public consciousness the depth of white supremacy, its impact, and possible pathways forward, right? The education, the political education. Reparations is a part of the public discourse. We're all familiar with the controversial 1619 project by Nicole Hannah-Jones. There's also a 1492 narrative that many folks want to go back to, and that's the initial encounter of a colonialist and missionary encounter of indigenous and African peoples, which the church has a large part to play in as well. So focus group number 1, I want to go down to the second to last paragraph. Actually, I'll go back up a little midway through the paragraph above here, where it says, at best, First Church could be a role model for institutions grappling with how to address their relationship with slavery. I alluded to that earlier in the summary. Participants suggest diversifying First Church's leadership, fostering a space that invites more diversity within the congregation, such as partnering with Black churches, sharing the church's spaces and resources with Black and Indigenous communities, organizing the congregation to stand with and for historically disenfranchised allies, etc. Now, this is coming from First Church, so these are staple comments that permeates our discussion of what it may look like as we definitive actions and ways that First Church might become an anti-racist congregation. So focus group number 1 and number 2 were internal, were interior to First Church, so you all can read those over. Focus group number 3 came from the Friday Cafe participants, and that's an internal, these are internal groups, so you can walk through and read those, and I name those populations because you all are familiar with, and that's a population that you all are a part of. Focus group number 4. Participants discussed the possibility of addressing racism through filing lawsuits, prioritizing the needs of at-risk communities, abdicating position and power to Black and Indigenous people, and exposing oneself to different cultures were some of the summary of some of the comments. The group discussed I'm jumping around a little bit, experiencing dismissiveness from white people in response to reparations. And participants questioned whether the white community is invested enough in finding and executing solutions. And then it went on to talk about political education and inclusive school curricula. That particular feedback was not very common in terms of questioning sort of the moral will of the white community, but it did come up. And so the recommendation or the thrust to participate in coming up with the solutions for reparations is a good starting point for that, meaning having participants and members of the focus groups in conversation with First Church or perhaps a broader community. But that centers really the need to build relationships across groups. Let's see. Yeah, sorry for not distilling this out. I thought everyone would have read it. So one thing I will highlight about this group is that participants suggested that First Church should publicize their history with slavery and demand that other institutions also hold themselves to the point that I raised earlier, that some of the work that First Church has already been doing or is just leading towards doing is very much seen as appropriate, and so that's very encouraging. And here is, another expert. I think it's important to look at this, that this work, as we know, is not easy, and it's going to continue to be challenging. But it may get more challenging. As a matter of fact, it promised to be more challenging in terms of building relationships, right? And I think the internal work that First Church has been doing should prepare us for that. The doubt, here is the similar comment again. Participants also express doubt um, in whether or not um, white people are really ready, in earnest, to relinquish um, power, to relinquish money, property, privilege, for the sake of upending racism. Historically, it says, one person said, when we did trust, um, they stole from us. Sorry, let me make this larger. Um, and finally, participants expressed a need for potentially exclusively Black involvement in the designing of questions and decision-making, and greater opportunities for participants to voice their thoughts to church leadership. So this is another point in the spectrum of opinion. There were folks that were very enthusiastic about being a part of the Remembrance Project, very enthusiastic about working with First Church. There were a few who were not interested at all. There were a few that, which is not this is reflective of a broad range of the diversity of opinions and within people of African descent. There were some that wanted to just work internally to the Black community, to strengthen, to build, to use our Black, the agency and the resources to lead, and also to access resources that are owed to Black folks in order to build their own community. And so you'll see some of that. I saw some of that in the narrative. So from exclusive involvement and decision making, and also opportunities to work alongside, which is the other end of the spectrum, First Church. And I think the final part, final focus group, this highlights some of the things that I've said already. The discussion of reparations and resolving racism with white people can be difficult, yet they uplifted the importance of raising awareness with difficult populations, so difficult conversations, a decentering the individual focus, and also having a conversation that is more about systems and the collective. Participants advised and audited of things like the school curriculum. Some of the findings are really pointing towards policy issues, which I know that have come up. So education policy, and they also challenge, finally, I'll say this, challenge First Church to serve as a model by publicly atoning for its history and partnering with again, here's another institution that came up. Harvard came up a lot because also it's been in the media. It was in the media a lot around its complicity. And dialogues about public dialogues about wealth and distribution or redistribution of wealth that would empower Black people to be more than just consumers. So there's a subtext, I think, within many of the focus groups that we that were there, right? And the subtext is really that the counter to white power, which has been seen as, or white supremacy, when we say white supremacy, we're talking about white power. There's a subtext about Black power, right? But Black power not being domination and subjugation, but having the necessary resources for self-empowerment, right? Which is a really important conversation, I think, at some point to have, particularly when we're talking about redistribution of resources, regenerating and remodeling systems. This is where it becomes important to include the voices and the vision of impacted communities, and also allow the solutions to germinate, right, from impacted communities. That communities can step into the power that they have, right? And then alongside communities that feel empowered, beyond that, there is a collective way of working together to make systems better for all of us. So I think that's a point of conversation, and I'm certainly open to more questions about that, or more conversation around around power, because the ultimate suggestion is that First Church can use its power position to support policy change, right? And for many, these policy changes are policies that enable and allow communities to access their own power through access to things that are basic human rights, right? That most other communities are accorded by virtue of race or class or gender.
Thank you,
And lastly, I'm going to go back to the suggested next steps.
Carly, before we go there, can I just suggest we just pause and just take a moment to let that sink in? I know a lot of us are eager to hear about next steps and to ask questions and may have ideas about next steps. I'm eager to hear what you have to say about next steps. But I think the purpose of our being here and having you share this with us is first and foremost our listening. And I just want to take a moment to check in with ourselves, in our bodies, in our hearts, and see, not just from our intellectual perspective, what we think about this, how we're feeling. Take a moment just to listen and take it in. So if you don't mind, Carlene, just maybe 30 seconds or a minute of silence just to let it sink in. Thank you. Give you a chance to catch your breath too, Carly. Thank you for walking us through all of that.
Sure. I'm happy to do that. And I do think it will be important for folks to go back and read and sit with and take it in. And we will have future opportunities to delve into this document. I think what you're getting at is to be reflexive, to engage it, and come and write down what your thoughts and feelings are about not only what the what focus groups are saying or what we're gathering from these focus groups, but also those reactions that I think Dan is getting at. Not, the range of reactions. So should I share the recommendations now or take feedback?
Up to you. I think maybe the recommendations, some people are saying they need to go. Why don't we go to the recommendations and then we can take whatever time is left for some questions and feedback.
Yeah, so understanding that we will further engage the findings of the focus groups and what persons have said. I think it will require a deep engagement, but the recommended next steps, which are simultaneous or parallel. I'm realizing that I'm not sharing the document, so let me do that. Are continued, I guess, because First Church have begun, but congregational wide or congregation wide education and spiritual formation. So a real targeted, intentional effort for congregational wide spiritual formation and education that includes a theological repositioning of the church. And these are really recommendations and suggested steps through a theology of liberation, because in order to untether the white supremacist culture from white supremacist theology, it cannot be recycling within the same theological narratives or frameworks or hermeneutics, right? Interpretations. So a spiritual, a congregation-wide spiritual formation and education. And I don't separate those two. Education and spiritual formation are not, we tend to operate within binaries in this culture, but these are not, liberation theology doesn't create and bifurcate the human in that way. So spiritual formation does include a theology and an education that rereads text and rereads the mission and the focus of a Christian community through reading Jesus and the Christian mandate. Outside of white supremacists' interpretations and theological constructions, which were co-constitutive of the harm that we're trying to undo, right? We tend to stay within those theologies to try to fix the problem. So that's one recommendation. The second is to establish a steering committee that includes focus group members in terms of discerning or deciding where to go next, and to be a part of the major areas or committees or processes in which First Church is deliberating. And finally, an open town hall through which we will discuss the focus groups, but it would be a broader segment of community that are invited, not just the focus group members and not just First Church members, but just an open town hall to talk about the issues that we're facing, and ways to move forward, but to get that input from community. All right.
So much.
That's a lot.
We have some time for questions. Unfortunately, I need to go at 1:15. I have a memorial service that I've been asked to do in Stoughton at 2:00. If Carlene's willing to stay after that for a few minutes, you're welcome to meet without me, of course. But why don't we just start and listen to a few questions and comments, and for Carlene, and knowing that this is an ongoing process. This is not our only chance. Meredith Quinn.
Oh, hi. That happened quickly. This is more of a comment because I'm still taking this in, and I just wanted to say, Carlene, thank you. This is invaluable. I know to our learning as a community, and I look forward to reading the report and reflecting on it more. And I wanted to share that I was actually paying attention to my reactions as Carlene was speaking. And it surprised me the heights of hope that I had, this sense of, as Carlisle was saying, something new that we could do, but also the pockets of resistance that then crept in and took over. And then it was the hope. And so I don't know if others had a similar experience, but wanted to share that that it there is, I really I didn't understand. I understand intellectually and a little bit on the somatic level now that it's going, what you were saying, Carlene, that it's going to get harder in some ways. And so I am just hoping and committing to keeping that hope and the possibility of something new out in front. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Meredith.
Paul, and then Sarah.
This project started out as a remembrance project, but from what I'm seeing, that's not really an accurate or helpful title anymore. The desire seems to be a different and a much larger project. Is that an accurate perception on my part?
I don't think it's either or. I think that the goal is a larger project than just a public symbolic statement of remembrance, although that's important. That's not going to get us to where we want to go to in terms of the larger project. So it's both and. It is the Remembrance Project, and it could be. We don't know what that will look like yet, because of the input and the feedback and how it will take shape. So it could be that if the community continues in that direction, and that's totally wonderful. That's great. However, it is one thing along the way or in concert with, this isn't linear, something greater, right? Something bigger, which is the hope that we're anchoring in. So I hope that helps your question.
you.
Helps me, yeah.
Yeah, and I'll just add that I think Public Remembrance Project, I think it's a placeholder until we do more listening and have relationships and can shape something together. I agree with Carlene that it's both and, but I do think that there is, whether it's a part of this specific work or another thing we do on the side, to have some act of public repentance, and that is an act of public remembrance as well. So the comment at the beginning about atonement is staying with me. That has to be a part of the spirit of this work too. Sarah.
I am really struck by thinking about the terms white power and black power in the way you describe them, Carlene, and thinking about white power, how it is equated with subjugation and domination, and black power being self-empowerment. That really hit me today, and I appreciated that. And I want to just lift up how I'm thinking about how important it is to not replicate destructive patterns of dominance when we, in all of our enthusiasm, that we continue to partner and walk together and journey with people of color, Black Americans whose voices are so central and need to stay central. So I just wanted to say that out loud because I'm really feeling that one right now. So I appreciated those words from you, Carlene. Thank you.
And thank you, Sarah. I am so grateful that you picked up on that. Had we more time to really delve into that, I think the beautiful part about the reframe, right? Because historically, when you hear Black power, a lot of white folks recoil because it's been associated and misinterpreted in or relegated to a particular context, right? Black Panther Party, and there's a whole miseducation around that part of Black folks and hopes and dreams and needs, right? But to hear it reframed that way, as well as the negative domination power, what we are entering into collectively, both Black and white people, is to look at power and how do we reclaim and access the divine power that we've all been given through love, right? So white power can also mean a communal and interconnected, interrelated building of love and a community in which we care about and use that power, that all of us have access to the resources that God intended, right? That is a reflection of God's kingdom. And so there's a lot more to be said about that. That's actually a sermon. There's a lot more to be said about that accesses the hope and the beauty and the joy of all of us together as beloved community. Yeah, powerfully, actually, powerfully.
Thank you.
Alex.
I was struck with a phrase in the 7th focus group that we should not be talking about reparations, but rather investment. And I think that moves the focus to the person gaining something that they can use in perpetuity, rather than just a one-time check or something like that. Am I understanding that correctly? And were there any examples that they had to give?
You are, again, it's not either or, right? That it's on a continuum, that there isn't anything wrong with folks who have resources. It's being done broadly. There are groups who are doing individual reparations, who are helping families through this pandemic, who don't have food, who are not paying their rent, right? So I'm not, you will never hear me say, do not give to individuals as you are led, as you are able, connect to families or people who can use those resources, who can use that check. But what we also heard is that it isn't only about that. It is reparation and recorrecting historical and current wrongs that are systemic. Having access to education and not be able and not incurring a lifetime of debt, right, is a part of reparations. You know, having access to financial resources. In the pandemic, Black churches, many Black churches who needed it the most, could not get the government benefits that were being offered for payroll, to carry their payroll, or to carry their institution, because they didn't have the kind of bureaucratic relationships to banks or resources or access that the government set in place, the criteria that a lot of other white churches did have access to, right? So creating policies, Alice, and pathways of restitution generationally, right, is a part of reparations. And I think we often say that, well, it isn't about money, but it is. Black Bodies was about money. It was about building wealth, unearned wealth that has been given to through systems of white supremacy more freely and broadly, and more as an entitlement to white communities than it has to Black communities. Barriers have been set up. So it is about money, but it isn't only about money, right? It is systemic and it is individual. It isn't either or. It is a very comprehensive way of thinking about supporting human life and opportunities to flourish.
And on that note, I think I want to start bringing us to a close. Carlene, you've given us so much to think about and to discern and to take in and to feel. We are gonna. I posted the PDF of Carlene's report in the chat, so we invite you all to read that and think about it, pray with it. We will be back in touch about our next steps. We are so glad that there is openness to relationship. I think the largest takeaway for me is that there is openness to working with us from some members of these focus groups, and that is good news, because we can't do this work on our own. And we could not do it without you, Carlene. Thank you so much for connecting us with these communities, for bringing your expertise in leading. We didn't even share that, but Carlene is not only a PhD student at Harvard right now in the Faculty of Arts and Sciences, doing work on religion and ritual. She has a whole prior professional life in public health, and so she was the right person at the right time to be bringing these gifts and ideas to us, and we're excited that we are continuing to work together. As we look ahead after Easter, we will have some 9:30 hours on reparations, on what it is and how we can kind of continue to think about it. And again, we'll be back in touch about next steps in this ongoing developing project. So with that, I'd just like to invite us to close with a few deep breaths of prayer. And as we do, I'm going to share something that I learned very recently. Let's take 3 breaths, 3 deep breaths. One where we're standing tall and aligning with our sense of God-given dignity, God's love for each of us, that power that God infuses in each of us. Let's take a deep breath. 2, think about the width of our connections with one another, with community, with this community, those of us who are here gathered, and with new partners, and with a more and more diverse and multiracial partnership and coalitions and work that we could do together. Let's take a deep breath into that sense of community. And 3 is one of depth. And here we think back to ancestors, our spiritual ancestors, the prophets and Jesus, and those who stood up for justice and who carried God's spirit of truth and love, maybe some who have inspired us to be here today. And thinking also about future generations, as Carlisle shared, what are the seeds that we are and can continue to plant, those heirloom seeds that can impact generations to come. 3rd breath. God, we thank you for your breath and for your power and for your spirit and for your love. We thank you for the gifts of Carlene and for the relationships that are budding in our community, in our wider community. Thank you for guiding us, your sense of time, your sense of the future, your sense of purpose. As Howard Thurman would say, take us into our days, God, refreshed, restored, renewed. Help us to get outside and give us your love, God, in all things. Amen.
Everyone have dropped my email in the chat. So I'm also, if you didn't have a chance to ask or please feel free. I'm open to receiving communication. Anything at all around this is fine. Thank you all. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you.
Yes.
Bye.
Bye.